Good morning. Welcome to King's Reporting News Hour, the 26th day in the 5th month, 16th year of Changi Timil. We're sitting in for the second king of Changi Yang Jingwen. And let's go right to the weather to see what's going on around the kingdom. Right now at Chongpyeong, Tennessee, we have 62 degrees, sunny, and it's going to get up to 89 today, partly sunny and warm. 65 tonight, mainly clear and humid. And then in father's hometown, Cheongju, North Pyongan province in Korea, 84 and mostly sunny right now, clear, and 56 for a low tonight. Tomorrow, mostly sunny and very warm, high of 88. At the Cheonryung Palace in northeast Pennsylvania, currently 63, partly sunny. 86 for a high today, very warm and humid with sun and some clouds. Tonight, 66 for a low, partly cloudy, warm and humid. And then at the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground, 74 to start the day, clear skies. Breezy this morning, otherwise partly sunny and humid with a thunderstorm around this afternoon, a high of 92. Tonight, mainly clear and humid, 74. But don't worry, 92 is not going to be the hottest in the kingdom today, because we got something even much, much warmer coming down pretty soon. Right now, in the Suncheon Palace in Korea, where it is in the midst of the rainy season there, 73 degrees right now and cloudy, but it says here that there's going to be rain for at least 60 minutes. Today, showers bringing heavy rainfall this evening, overcast and humid, low of 67, and tomorrow 86 for a high, sun through high clouds and less humid. And here we go at the Gumna Palaces, high tomorrow of 96. 96 for a high. But anyway, in the meantime, right now, 84, partly cloudy, getting down to 70 degrees tonight. Tomorrow, very hot with clouds and sun. Caution advised if outside for extended periods of time, a high of 96. And in Ilan, Taiwan, 86 right now and clear, low of 76 tonight, and almost beating Gunma Palaces. They get up to 94 tomorrow. Some sun, then turning cloudy with brief showers in the afternoon, 94 tomorrow. All right, let's go to Father's Word. I'm going to turn on my flashlight here because you may see that I was able to clean up that sort of Holy Spirit thing. It wasn't really a Holy Spirit thing up there, but the problem turns out was the overhead light, and I turned that off and fiddled around a bit, and it works, and it seems to work now. So I got rid of that. But now I have to use my flashlight to read the Cheonseongeum. And Father has a very interesting word for us today. 탕감한 모든 것을 여러분이 선생으로부터 이어받아야 할 텐데 그냥은 발판이 없습니다. So Father says that you should be able to inherit everything from me that has been indemnified. But you don't have a basis. 팔pan is kind of a foot. Pal is foot, right? Pal, and then 팔pan is sort of a stepping stone or anyway, basis, foundation on which to do that. You don't have a foundation on which to do that. 재단이 없습니다. There is no altar. There is no altar. 이런 세계적 재단을 꾸며가지고 승리한 이 모든 재단에서 재물을 옮겨 놓으려면 자기 나름대로 재단을 갖고서야 재물을 옮겨 놓을 수 있다는 것입니다. So, only if you have established a worldwide altar, and then you can move all things, everything. You can move everything onto this Victoria altar. And then, only then will you be able to inherit things. And then he says, what is it then that places the things on the altar, or places everything on the altar? It is the family church. It is the family church. And the family church by the family church, of course, he's referring to our each establishing our own sort of tribe. In other words, our neighborhood. We gather the neighbors in our home or in somebody's home, and we have a we have our own foundation within our own sort of circle of neighbors or colleagues or something like that. And that kind of answers some questions for me. But yeah, it's interesting. Um, that actually gives me kind of a new interpretation, or not, well, I wouldn't say new, but an additional interpretation of why what happened in February 2013 actually happened. Uh, so Father was wanted to inherit everything to us, but perhaps part of the problem, of course, this is not to take anything away from Hak Jahan's crime, but also uh, we need to ask ourselves, did we have the foundation on which to inherit everything that Father had established? And if not, then perhaps we are in the process of establishing that foundation, and we are able to inherit um, as we go along, and as we build a foundation, perhaps we are able to inherit more and more of Father's foundation, of the things that Father prepared to inherit to his children. I don't know. It just sort of crosses my mind as I read this today. All right. We can think about and pray about that. Okay. Okay, then. So right now, today feels like things have sort of moved away from the precipice, right? Moved away from the cliff. Um, maybe the doomsday clock has been pushed back maybe a minute or two or three, and we're not quite at the danger point that we were a few days ago. Praise God, and thank you, Father. President Trump, as I reported yesterday, has now said, okay, we're going to give the situation 12 days, and he says that there's a good chance that we'll be able to work out something with Iran during those 12 days. And apparently, one idea is for kind of a consortium where the U.S. and some other countries perhaps go in and work with Iran on their nuclear activities. And this way, the international community will have a lot more information about what's going on in Iran with their nuclear, and won't have to be guessing as to whether they're actually creating a nuclear weapon or not. Meanwhile, of course, Israel and Iran are still going back and forth, and even the news today is that some people in the leadership of Iran have been killed. So, but that's now kind of a normal day to day right now. Unfortunately, it's not what we like to have as normal day to day, but that's what it's become. But at least it's not getting any worse than what it was. And even Harvard now, President Trump says he might be able to work out some kind of a deal with Harvard, in terms of the permission for Harvard to accept international students. So maybe this is a time for deal making. I don't know, but it does seem that things are a little bit less dire today than they were recently. Interesting story here about Ursula von der Leyen. This is on who wrote this story? Marcus Today. Okay, let's take a look at this and try to think of what on earth this might mean. It says here that Ursula von der Leyen, of course, she's the head of the EU, And it says here that she's returned as China hawk, shuts down talk of diplomatic reset. Summer has arrived in Brussels with a new trend. Doves are out and hawks are in. After weeks of telegraphing signs toward a diplomatic rapprochement with China, or at least a thaw, Ursula von der Leyen made an abrupt about-face at the G7 summit with a broadside attack against Beijing's pattern of dominance, dependency, and blackmail vis-a-vis its trading partners, including the European Union and the United States. And of course, China has already reacted against this, came out and said that these statements were irresponsible and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and what they usually say in their usual script. China has largely shown its unwillingness to live within the constraints of the rules-based international system, von der Leyen said in her intervention. And that's an interesting statement because China has long stressed that it's the exact opposite, that they are the ones who are always following the rules. This is what they say, always following the rules. And people who I guess want to do business with China have always nodded and says yes. But now Ursula von der Leyen comes out and says unwillingness to live within the constraints of the rules-based international system, which by the way is true. But it's interesting that suddenly the head of the EU would come out and say this. While others opened their market, China focused on undercutting intellectual property protections, massive subsidies with the aim to dominate global manufacturing and supply chains, she went on. This is not market competition, it is distortion with intent. The president of the European Commission declared point blank that the source of the biggest collective problem in the global trading system lay in China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001. It's as if aliens came down and abducted her, and then replaced her with someone else. Beijing's entry into the WTO has been highly controversial as it opened international markets to a wave of low-cost exports. The admission is linked to the so-called China shock and the decline in manufacturing jobs in both the EU and the US. At the G7 summit, von der Leyen warned a new China shock was underway. It was a gloves-off denunciation that laid bare the state of mind of the Commission chief, her mounting displeasure and exasperation. In many ways, it was a return to the hawkish stance of her first mandate, during which she famously promoted the concept of de-risking to slash vulnerable dependencies that China could exploit. Beijing was quick to hit back at von der Leyen's invective. So what is von der Leyen saying in 3 words or less? Trump was right. This is what she's saying, right? Trump was right. And then anyway, the Chinese spokesperson, of course, baseless and biased, and also China stands ready to increase communication and coordination with the EU, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the conciliatory attempt fits in with Beijing's charm offensive, as diplomats call it, toward the bloc in response to the disruptive policies of U.S. President Donald Trump, who has imposed punitive tariffs on allies and adversaries alike. Sensing an impending rupture in the Western alliance, China has made several overtures to curry favor with Brussels, including lifting controversial sanctions on lawmakers ahead of a much anticipated EU-China summit in late July, et cetera, et cetera. But in her G7 intervention delivered with Trump in the room, the commitment was conspicuous by its absence. Instead, she let the hawk fly free and wild. At the core of her speech was Beijing's recent decision to restrict the sales of 7 rare earth materials, which she said amounted to weaponizing trade. China holds quasi-monopolistic position over rare earths, the 17 metallic elements that are essential for building cutting-edge technologies. The country commands roughly 60% of the world's supply, 90% of the processing and refining capacity. Although the restrictions have eased in recent days, von der Leyen's caution the threat remains and called on the G7 to close ranks to pile extra pressure on China. Rare earths are just the tip of an iceberg made up of. So, without the rare earth element, of course, pretty much all of the advanced technologies, including military weapons, will come to a grinding halt in terms of their production. And I think China's first critical and then conciliatory remarks are kind of saying, well, yeah, we don't like what you're saying, but we'll forgive you if you come here quickly and beg our forgiveness, then you can you can be forgiven. You can have, maybe we'll give you a few of the rare earth elements even. So China is using the rare earths obviously to try and, well, to control world economy gradually, and I think van der Leyen perhaps is sensing this, and so she's reacting against it. I guess not just her, but obviously her staff or people who are working with her in the EU also, I guess, are sensing this, that China is going to perhaps use those rare earth things. But the U.S. also has rare earth minerals. Just that it costs more to dig them up in the U.S. than it does to import them from China. This is what I understand. That we could develop, and not just the U.S., but in all other places as well. North Korea, by the way, I think also has our rare earth minerals, and they could be developed as a source of rare earths in the future. And rare earths are just the tip of an iceberg made up of commercial disputes that have driven a stark wedge between Brussels and Beijing. The last few years have seen the bloc impose steep duties on China-made electric vehicles, exclude Chinese companies from public tenders of medical devices, label Huawei and ZTE as high-risk suppliers of 5G networks, and launch investigations into suspicious uses of industrial subsidies. Brussels has also accused Beijing of engaging large-scale campaigns of foreign information manipulations and interference. That sounds like they could just say propaganda, but I don't know why they don't. I guess the longer the phrase, the more intellectual it sounds. Engaging in large-scale propaganda campaigns. All right, let's just keep it simple. Hacking into state agencies, fueling military tensions in the Taiwan Strait, violating the human rights of Uyghur population, and acting as the key enabler of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, wait a second. Well, let's not leave out the South China Sea. China claiming all of the South China Sea, pretty much. Despite loud pleas from Europeans, Xi Jinping has doubled down on his no-limits partnership with Vladimir Putin, causing dismay and outrage across the continent. For China, they certainly don't want Russia to lose, they don't want a regime change in Russia as a result of the Ukraine war, do they? They like the authoritarian president they know rather than the authoritarian president that they don't know. I guess they would want the Ukraine war to keep on going so as to gradually weaken Russia and increasingly make Russia kind of a vassal state of China, which Russia pretty much is already, but to continue that relationship in that way. By offering no significant concessions and sticking to its long-standing practices, China has missed the opportunity offered by von der Leyen after Trump's inauguration, says Noah Barkin, a visiting senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Von der Leyen's unvarnished criticism of China at the G7 summit are a response to Beijing's intransigence. Unless China shows a willingness to address Europe's concerns, the summit in July is unlikely to produce any deliverables of substance, Barkin said. The likelihood is that tensions between the EU and China will continue to grow. The closing of the US market to Chinese products will lead to a diversion of exports into Europe, increasing the threat to European industry, and the withdrawal of US support for Ukraine will turn China's support for Russia into an even bigger problem for Europe. Right. So although von der Leyen has earned plaudits for her clear-eyed, matter-of-fact assessment of EU-China relations, her views have not become universally accepted by member states, the true guardians of political power. In April, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez flew to Beijing, held a bilateral meeting with President Xi, and made a plea to turn the page on the confrontational approach. Spain is in favor of more balanced relations between the European Union and China, of finding negotiated solutions to our differences, which we have, and of greater cooperation in areas of common interest, as Sanchez said. The Spaniards' words immediately caught the attention of Brussels and sent speculation of a diplomatic reset into overdrive. But a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations says the buzzy discourse was never credible. Hopes of a possible reset, if any, were mostly projected by those who do not see eye to eye with von der Leyen's commission. This guy said, this commission seems quite consistent in explaining its approach toward China and how it sees the threats, the challenges, and the very limited opportunities for cooperation with China under current conditions. And there's von der Leyen with Xi Jinping and then Macron. And the flags of France and China and the EU. Politics, of course, come with economics attached. For many countries, particularly those export-oriented, China remains an extraordinarily valuable market of 1.4 billion people. Well, let's not keep saying that. The 1.4 billion number, where does it come from? Well, it comes from the Chinese Communist Party. So what does the Chinese Communist Party do with the statistics? They lie, always, always. And so recently, more and more people have been casting doubt on this 1.4 billion. Maybe they didn't have 1.4 billion to begin with. Maybe it's a few hundred million less than that, or maybe more than that, less than that. Maybe we need to discount it by even more, especially after the COVID situation, where basically they seem to have been disposing of people who became a problem. And especially after what they've been doing with the Uyghurs and harvesting their organs and so forth. I think probably we should put an asterisk on that 1.4 figure. Despite the multiple obstacles and hurdles that European companies face when doing business, with Trump threatening a whopping 50% tariff on the bloc if trade talks fail, having a cushion to fall onto is considered indispensable to avoid or at least mitigate the potential ravaging impact. Trade will be at the very top of the agenda in the EU-China summit next month at the end of July, with both sides looking forward to having something to announce. Brussels is keen to put an end to China's probes into brandy, pork, and dairy products, which it considers unjustified. But as the date nears, hopes for a trade breakthrough that can make a tangible difference on the ground and relieve some of the tensions are fading, as von der Leyen's hardened tone at the G7 demonstrated. It's about being realistic. We still see China as a partner, competitor, and rival, a senior diplomat said, speaking on condition of anonymity. We have to be perhaps more confident about our interests, what we can do to pursue them better, but also act when actions are taken that threaten the stability of our continent. Yeah, so there is friction between U.S. and EU right now in terms of trade, but also between EU and China, especially because China is so gung-ho in supporting Russia and continuing so that Russia can continue the war in Ukraine. And that war is weakening Russia. It's also weakening, obviously, Ukraine, but it's also weakening those nations that are allied with Ukraine to keep supporting Ukraine. Their resources are going into that war as well. And I think that's why President Trump is basically stepping back from that. And I think that is a wise decision on his part. China, is it weakening China? Perhaps, because Chinese resources are going in there. North Korea, of course, has lost, apparently has lost, we don't know how many, but probably in the thousands of soldiers in Ukraine. Although the ones that survived have gained combat experience, which is pretty valuable. A diplomat from another country kept a cool head to lower expectations ahead of the summit, arguing China's alliance with Russia and campaigns of foreign interference remain serious and disturbing factors with no sign of improvement. If you really want to deepen ties with us, that's impossible if at the same time behave like this, the diplomat said. The EU needs to stand up for its own interests, no matter who's in the White House. Well, obviously, that's certainly true, but I think the EU's interest, if they stand up for their own interest, then they would figure out a way to bring the Ukraine war to an end. And I think that would have to imply that someone other than Zelensky steps into the position. But it's hard because, you know, Zelensky is a kind of a product of the West, right? The CIA and I'm sure also the Europeans were involved in it as well. So it's hard to give up on that. But anyway, we'll see how things develop between this sort of a complicated relationship between EU, Russia, China, US. We'll see how things go. Okay. But basically now the EU, though, is saying that Trump was right when it comes to China. And you can't be sort of resetting or just sort of unilaterally improving relations with China without making a huge sacrifice of your own interests. Let's look at the headlines on Breitbart. Trump nominated, this J.D. Vance in L.A. Blah, 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 blah. We talked about this so much. Trump nominated for Nobel Peace Prize for preventing India-Pakistan war. The last president to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, of course, was the one that started 3 new wars during his administration and also expanded U.S. participation in 4 others. So I think the value of the Nobel Peace Prize has been devalued quite a bit, I think. Maybe, Trump likes to have these kinds of things, sort of shiny things. So I'm sure he'll be very happy if he receives it, but it's awarded by the Nobel Committee in Oslo, I think, isn't it? And it's a very, very political situation. I'm surprised they haven't given it to Greta Thunberg yet. Did they already? I don't think so, not yet. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the level that they're at, though. And Clinton campaign manager, Democrats leaderless, agendaless after 2024 election massacre. Who's the campaign manager who's saying this? I'm curious. Patty Solis Doyle. I never heard of him. Okay. Okay, and let's see here. James, the Senate must confirm. I don't know who that is. Trump always a peacemaker. Sometimes you need toughness to make peace. Yes. Okay. Let's go to this story on the Hill about Jerome Powell. Talk about his decision not to cut rates, and being baffling for many reasons. And of course, President Trump is baffled also because, people were saying that, because of the tariffs, the prices are going to go up, and they haven't that much. And it would seem that there's room to cut rates, but he hasn't. And I think this person, let's see what he has to say. I think I know why they're not cutting rates, but let's see what he has to say. The people forget that Jay Powell is not an economist. The Federal Reserve chair was trained as a lawyer, receiving his JD from Georgetown University in '79. He then went on to work as an investment banker. Maybe that's why Powell keeps getting it wrong. He's not an economist. Has he instead become a politician? That's the view of President Trump, who is pushing Powell to lower interest rates to no avail. Well, they hire, what is it? I think they said, according to one of their websites, hire 400 PhDs. And I'm sure some of those PhDs are in economics. But I think that it's because they want, well, they want rates to remain high for certain reasons. Anyway, let's go through this first. For the fourth straight month, the Federal Open Market Committee held rates steady, even though many think the time has come to give borrowers a break. Even though the Fed itself is projecting slowing growth and rising unemployment, their excuse, a jump in inflation, visible so far only to those with anti-tariff agenda. In the lead up to yesterday's Fed meeting, Trump joked that he himself could do a better job than stupid Powell, whom he has threatened to fire. Why the animus? Check the record and consider Powell's latest decision to keep interest rates steady. But who appointed Powell? I think it was Trump, wasn't it? I think it was, yes. During his first term. I think it was Trump that appointed Powell. Let me just confirm that. So Trump can't complain too much. Who appointed Powell? Who appointed Jerome Powell? Yeah, sure enough, yeah. Jerome Powell was sworn in as chairman of the Fed on February 5, 2018. He had been first nominated to the position by President Donald Trump on November 2nd, 2017, and confirmed by the Senate. And he was nominated to a second term by President Joe Biden, confirmed by the Senate, and sworn in on May 23rd, 2022. So originally, he got the job because of Trump. So why the analysts check the record? Remember that the Fed has a dual mandate. It seems to keep inflation around 2% as measured by the personal consumption index and to maintain low unemployment. But they also have an unspoken third mandate, which is to keep stock prices from falling too much. Anyway, this is what many people say. Last fall, about 6 weeks before the presidential election, the Fed cut interest rates by 50 basis points just in time to juice the economy and boost Kamala Harris's chances of becoming president. Real GDP growth in the second quarter of last year surprised economists by jumping to 2.8%, well ahead of the anemic 1.4% expansion recorded in the first quarter. Job growth remained robust for most of the year, averaging 186,000 job additions per month. Employment growth slowed some in the summer, but the economy added 142,000 jobs in August, which was reported before the Fed met in September. Unemployment was steady at 4.2%. There was no employment emergency. Meanwhile, inflation for August 2024, as measured by the CPI, the most recent month reported to the Fed before the slashed rates, was 2.5%. Yes, the rate of inflation had been dropping, but it was still far above the Fed's target. And in fact, the month-to-month rate had actually accelerated in July from the prior 2 months and held steady in August. In other words, while certainly inflation had moderated, it was still an issue. So why did the Fed choose to cut rates? Good question. Just before the presidential election, when it would most have benefited Kamala Harris. Good question. And in fact, inflation turned higher again after the rate cut. In September, it rose to 2.6%. And by January, just as President Trump took office, it had bounced back to 3%. Real GDP growth, meanwhile, came in at a robust 2.4% in the fourth quarter. In retrospect, a rate cut, and especially a jumbo cut of 50 basis points, was not necessary unless you were Kamala Harris and wanted to head into the election touting a strong economy. Fast forward to today, when Powell has assumed the role of soothsayer. He claims to be guided by the data, but the data today shows inflation much lower, actually hitting the Fed's 2% inflation target. Meanwhile, economic growth is slowing and the labor market is showing some weakness. It would seem a perfect time to reduce interest rates to give the economy a boost, but Powell has just chosen not to do that. Inflation has recently dropped to the lowest level in 4 years. The core PCE number, closely watched by the Fed, was up 0.1% in April month to month and 2.5% above the year prior. Last September, when Powell cut rates, it was running at 2.7%. The job market has shown some cracks. The last month showed a gain of 139,000, slightly better than expected, but below the prior month's 147,000 addition. Also, the household employment level reported in another survey fell by almost 700,000. So people are so people are losing their jobs. Unemployment was steady at 4.2%, but other indicators showed the jobs market softening. The most recent JOLTS report showed job openings at about 7 million, gradually declining, but down sharply from the 12 million level recorded in 2022. More concerning is the latest job report from the National Federation of Independent Businesses, where small companies' plans to hire remain in weak territory. The Fed itself, in its latest Beige Book report, noted all districts described lowered labor demand, citing declining hours worked and overtime, hiring pauses, and staff reduction plans. That's presumably why they bumped up their 2025 forecast of inflation from 4.4% recorded in March to 4.5%. That's what they're predicting for next year. Given slowing inflation and a weakening jobs picture, and since the Fed expects 2 rate cuts later this year, why not take action now? In his press conference after the rates announcement, Powell said inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer run goal. Yes, and that was true last September too, when the Fed slashed rates, double, right, by 50 basis points in September, just before the presidential election, when it was most advantageous to Kamala Harris. Powell's ultimate excuse: increases in tariffs this year are likely to push up prices and weigh on economic activity. Fair enough, but so far that hasn't happened. Does it matter? Yes, especially to young people starting out who want to buy a home. High interest rates are just depressing the housing market. People fortunate to have long-term low interest rate mortgages on their homes are reluctant to move, not wanting to take on new borrowings at nearly 7% where mortgages are today. That means the supply of houses for sale is low. Although high mortgage rates, the 30-year is now close to 7%, should theoretically mean lower prices, helping buyers that largely isn't happening. The median sales price of existing homes in April 2025 was $414,000. Wow, an all-time high for the month of April and the 22nd consecutive month of year-over-year price increases, according to Bankrate. New home prices have slipped slightly, but not enough to encourage a rebound. The home ownership rate dropped to 65.1% last quarter, the lowest level since the beginning of 2020, just before COVID hit. That rate was 67.9%. Buying a home is how millions of Americans have traditionally begun their financial journey. It's an investment that over time not only provides shelter, but also encourages saving, and historically has created wealth. All right. The current young generation may want to rethink a few sort of assumptions that have been around for a long time. One of them is that you begin your financial journey by buying a house. Of course, another is that you begin your educational journey by going to college, instead of a trade school or something like that. So there are many, many other options available, and I think people ought to probably be looking at those options. Being in debt for 30 years. And speaking from my own experience in the US, owning a house is more expensive than people make it out to be. You have taxes, and you have, of course, taxes. You have when things break, you can't call the landlord. You have to fix it. You have to call someone in, and if you call in a plumber, then they will charge you. This was a long time ago. I'm sure it's more now, but when I had the experience, a plumber charged us $200 something to change the gasket on our toilet. next time it happened, I did it myself. Yeah, it's more expensive than people make it out to be. Unless you can do what the king says and get a house, get land and a house without going into debt. If you can figure that out, then that's certainly a good way to go. But going into debt for 30 years, yeah. Of course, I guess most people don't actually go for 30 years. They will sell at some point. But then when they sell, they may, be buying a larger house if they're getting more children, or at a certain age, and they sell and scale down. And so it's still you're in debt. You're in debt though for your entire life. And I think that is something that my wife and I are now out of, and we're very, very happy about that. Right. We're very, very happy about that, not being in debt. So um, don't be dependent on Powell to sort of set your life like that and set the amount of money that you're going to be owing the bank every month. Not a good thing, not a good place to be. Okay. All right, let's go back to the Breitbart. Okay. Let's see here. Share this again. Pollock says that Trump 2 weeks to slow Iran plan could lead to the best situation for the world. Perhaps so. Okay, that's a video though, so I won't be showing it. Nobody will miss the Iranian regime, but we have no idea who would replace it. That's also true. I watched this one YouTube channel that's run by an Iranian guy. He's in London. He's British, but I guess his parents came out of Iran. Uh, anyway, he's a kind of the part of the Iranian exile community, and he was talking about how, okay, well, now all that has to happen is that the army has to side with the people, and he's very gung ho. He's like I was talking about yesterday. He's one of these people in the Iranian exile community who think that things are really going to change this time, that the people are going to stand up. And he was saying, well, all that has to happen now is the army has to side with the people. And yeah, that because why? Why? Because they've got the guns, and it's just another illustration saying that people with the guns make the rules. He was not saying the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, but the army, he said, may side with the people. And if that happens, then things will change in Iran. And talk about how he's talking about the crown prince in exile, or the sort of the prince, I guess, in exile, who is trying to build a political base for himself in Iran right now, so that he can take over from the mullahs if they fall. But things will be very fluid, yes. And this always happens, of course, in times of revolution, because when revolutions start, it's really no telling where they're going to go. Look at the French Revolution. It produced Napoleon, and well, before that, it produced a Robespierre and the Reign of Terror and so forth. So yes, there is a huge risk. That is true, but people still at some point will say, you know what, enough is enough. Whatever comes later, it can't be worse than this, and so we're going to throw out the people who are in charge now. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what the army decides to do in Iran. Okay. By the way, the appeals court, I guess, has given Trump the right to maintain his command over the California National Guard in California, so they're going to stay there for a while, and also the Marines as well. China attacks Philippine ship in Philippine waters with water cannon. So this is what Ursula von der Leyen was saying, but she did not include the South China Sea, which is an important omission, I think. Right. And Ninth Circuit panel unanimously affirms Second Amendment Foundation win. Right. take a look at this. On Friday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit affirmed the Second Amendment Foundation's lower court victory against California's one-gun-a-month law. Wow. What's happening in the Ninth Circuit? We can't call it the Ninth Circus anymore. The case, Wen versus Bonta, was brought by SAF, the Firearms Policy Coalition, Inc., and San Diego County Gun Owners PAC, 2 FFL gun dealers, and 6 private citizens, including Michelle Wen. The 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit panel were, we don't need to know their names. And let's see, the majority opinion said California has a one-gun-a-month law that prohibits most people from buying more than one firearm in a 30-day period. The district court held that this law violates the Second Amendment. We affirm California's law is facially unconstitutional because possession of multiple firearms and the ability to acquire firearms through purchase without meaningful constraints are protected by the Second Amendment, and California's law is not supported by our nation's tradition of firearms regulation. SAF Executive Director Adam Kraut commented on the court victory, saying today's decision claws back a portion of Second Amendment rights stolen by California's government. Yes, okay. Unsurprisingly, this is an article by A.W.R. Hawkins, who has appeared on the King's Report at least a couple of times that I can remember. And he added California's one gun per month law was in clear violation of the Second Amendment, as affirmed by the unanimous decision in the Ninth Circuit. This ruling is one step closer to liberating the people of the state from the totalitarian ideals of those in power who believe the right to keep and bear arms is a second-class right. Right, okay. Okay, let's read Hawkins' curriculum vitae. Award-winning Second Amendment columnist for Breitbart and writer and curator Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins, which is a weekly newsletter. He is a political analyst for Armed American Radio, a member of Gun Owners of America, and the director of global marketing for Lone Star Hunts. He was a visiting fellow at the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal in 2010 and has a PhD in military history. Great. You can follow him on Instagram, AWRs_Hawkins. All right, very good. Yes, he always writes good stuff for Breitbart. And let's see here. North Korea is still oppressing citizens with coronavirus controls. Well, yeah, I mean, why not? Once you put a control in place, North Korea is not going to let it up. I mean, come on, people might start getting ideas about having freedom. Yes, that's terrible, terrible, terrible. Our brothers and sisters in North Korea are under a terrible regime there, and they need to be liberated as quickly as possible. And we're making progress toward that. We're making progress. Okay. Right. Let's see here. New York City's power-hungry Democrats want to keep illegal aliens on 2030 census. Well, the census actually is about population. And let's see. Let me look at the Constitution where it gives the, because the census is based on the Constitution, right? You know that, right? That in the Constitution it says that there's supposed to be a census every 10 years. And I want to look at this. Okay, the census clause of the U.S. Constitution, specifically Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, mandates a census or enumeration of the population to be conducted every 10 years. And then, of course, the members of the House of Representatives are apportioned according to that. So when you talk about population, right, seems to me that everyone is included, population. Originally, of course, one, much to our chagrin, slaves were only counted as 3/4 of a human being. And fortunately, that was corrected later on. But are you going to count then illegals as zero, as not even 3/4, but as zero? I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right. So I think the Democrats probably, for the wrong reasons, but probably are on the side of the Constitution in this particular case. They are reportedly trying to inflate the city's share of seats in Congress and of federal funding by keeping illegal aliens in the federal 2030 census. And this is one reason, by the way, for controlling immigration. So if people are illegal, then get them out, get them out. Coalition of elected officials, community activists, and labor civic leaders in New York City is planning ahead for the 2030 census as Republicans push to have non-citizens excluded from congressional districting counts. As I was in Washington for a while, and I went to the National Archives and looked up my ancestors and stuff like that. And I noticed that my great-grandmother may never have become an actual American citizen. Because when you think of it, why would she? Women at that, we're talking about she and my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather came to the United States in the 1860s, just after the Civil War. And why would she? She couldn't vote. She couldn't own property. So why would she become an American citizen? And what, the whole purpose of becoming an American citizen at that time was to be able to own property. And my great-grandfather did actually. He ran a business for a while, a gardening business. So if you're going to say today, okay, today though, but only citizens count. Only citizens count. I don't know. I think the Republicans are in a weak position on this one. Yeah. New York Democrats fear they will lose at least 2 of their 26 seats in the House, according to the Times. And I need more people in my district just for redistricting purposes, Red State reported at the time. So, Representative Yvette Clarke, who represents Brooklyn's 9th congressional district in January 2024, revealed why she personally wants illegal aliens coming into the United States. Right. So, yeah, and yeah, I think that is probably one of the reasons that the Democrats opened up the floodgates and basically ignored the existence of a border, was in fact to do this exact thing. So if you don't like illegal aliens being in the census, then that's ICE's job, right? That's ICE's job to go in there and to remove them. The director of the Border Security and Immigration Center at Heritage Foundation said in March that mass immigration is a gift to Democrats and their electoral power, according to Breitbart News. When asked what liberal states gain from mass illegal immigration, she said they are counted in the census, even though non-citizens can't vote and are not supposed to vote. And also, welfare and stuff like that, healthcare, for example, it turns out they do receive government money in several ways, and also healthcare. And those numbers are used for districting in Congress, and in turn, those same numbers are used for the presidential electoral college votes. She stated during a House Homeland Security Committee hearing. Right. Okay. So, right. But yeah. So, well, if you don't like it, then so you can get them out. But if they're there, if they manage to be there until 2030, the next 5 years, when the next census is conducted, then yeah, they should count according to the Constitution, in my opinion. All right. And Tom Homan says 1,000 deportations teams are on the streets every day. I wonder how many people they're getting in New York City. And of course, the leftist press is always focusing on the sort of the hardship cases. Someone's been in the country for 30, 40 years, or they're they're running a business, stuff like that, and those do concern me. I think that really the focus should be on the millions that Biden brought in, and people who are paying taxes, employing people and businesses. They should be. I'm not saying giving them a pass, but at least put them at the bottom of your totem pole, priority totem pole. And I still have the position, that people who are like that, people who are well integrated into American society, in other words, they're paying taxes, they're not committing serious felonies. These kinds of people should be allowed to stay on condition that there's no path to citizenship. Citizenship is a right that belongs exclusively to those who go through the legal process. And also no right to invite relatives. And in those conditions, then, as long as they don't commit serious felonies, I think that they should be allowed to stay. But right now, ICE is really trying hard to get their numbers up one way or another. And so they're going after low-hanging fruit, basically, which I understand. But I understand, but I don't necessarily support them going after those kinds of people. Get the people that Biden let in. And while you're at it, find out where all those children went. All these unaccompanied minors came into the country. Where are they? Is ICE finding out where they are? That would be something if we could figure out, if the Trump people could figure that out. Okay, let's see here. Iran peace talks last over 4 hours. UN ministers urged Tehran to talk to Washington. Okay. And Saudi Arabia watches Iran-Israel conflict nervously, but at a distance for now. That's interesting, because Iran and Saudi Arabia, of course, are basically enemies. And Iran hates Saudi Arabia almost as much as it hates the United States and Israel. Saudi international relations expert Dr. Salim Al-Yami told Saudi news network Al Arabiya on Wednesday that the kingdom's major diplomatic concern at the moment is containing the Iran-Israel conflict to keep the rest of the Middle East from destabilizing. Interestingly, while Al-Yami threw in a few perfunctory shots at Israel for conducting a blatant attack on a sovereign state, his analysis did not suggest a great deal of genuine outrage at Israel or concern for the fate of Iran among Saudi government officials. The Saudis and their Gulf allies are calling for de-escalation, but no one seems eager to step forward and save the Iranians from obliteration. This attitude would have been no surprise a decade ago, when the Saudis and the Iranians were regional rivals on the verge of becoming all-out enemies, but they supposedly mended fences in 2023 through meetings brokered by China. The Chinese touted the Saudi-Iran rapprochement as a massive diplomatic triumph and a sign that Beijing had become a major force in global diplomacy. Today, the Saudis are witnessing Israel dismantle the Iranian military with roughly the same sense of urgency as Willy Wonka watching Augustus Gloop sink into a river of chocolate. Okay, I didn't watch that movie, so I don't know what this means. But I guess someone is sinking into a river of chocolate, and I don't know. Al-Yami's analysis hinted the Saudis were growing exasperated with Iran's stubborn insistence on enriching uranium, even in the face of devastating Israeli airstrikes. Saudi Arabia supposedly does not have nuclear weapons, but there is a theory that actually they have nuclear weapons on consignment in Pakistan. That Pakistan is holding Saudi Arabia's nuclear weapons. That's one sort of a conspiracy theory that's out there, which a theory that could be true, that could well be true. So, yeah, but officially anyway, and also more or less unofficially, Saudi Arabia does not have nuclear weapons. And so, yeah, they would be concerned to see Iran getting closer to building their own nuclear weapons. Yeah. Right, but anyway, we have to stop there today. Thank you for joining us today. This morning, I will see you on Monday. Yes, I'll see you on Monday. I hope that everyone has a very good Sunday tomorrow. Worship at your local church or in your home. Maybe just, hey, Father talk today about family church. There you go. All right, so God bless, Godspeed. May his kingdom come quickly.